Are you ready to rumble?
Good morning, Trumptopia.
Congressional Showdown.
A special segment of the almost daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Good morning, Trumptopia and beyond. Hello and namaste, dear friends and listeners. It is I, your eccentric yet humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and this is Good Morning Trumptopia, a special segment of the almost daily Zencast. An experimental talk radio style podcast show exploring the radical intersection of politics, society, and spirituality in an unorthodox fashion. Always raw, real, and radically unscripted. With music. Good morning, friends. It is Sunday, January 3rd, 6:20 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we here in Trumptopia, formerly known as the great old United States of America, are bracing ourselves for a congressional showdown of unprecedented 2020-like proportions. A bit of a hangover, leftover nightmare of a clusterfuck of electoral college contention. It looks like a little bit of a GOP Trumptopian civil war is about to ensue. If I'm not mistaken, it's either Tuesday or Wednesday. My brain can't decide/remember if it's on the 5th or the 6th. But apparently there is some curiously building momentum amongst the Republican congressional body of representatives that feel that the best way they can represent their constituency is to overturn the otherwise seemingly, apparently, appropriately certified and ratified popular vote by challenging the electoral college slate of electors, etc., etc., etc. Now, you might remember a while back when I vaguely referenced electoral college shenanigans. It was this general neighborhood of activity that I was referencing, and it's the only sort of category of action that Team Trump could conceivably take, where I thought this is the only, of all the Hail Mary passes, of which there have been many, of all the Hail Mary passes that Team Trump have wildly thrown. And I think we were approaching almost 60 different legal challenges, right? We were 50 plus, somewhere in there. All but one were summarily rejected, dismissed, and or thrown out of court or withdrawn by the legal team because it was obvious they weren't going to get anywhere. One, and I have failed. I said I would try to look into what the case was and what they won, but they won one little case which rendered nothing. It did not lead to any massive overthrowing. So here we are, the third day of 2021. And I bet a big, huge chunk of America is wondering, why don't we swear in the new president on January 1st? Why do we make ourselves wait almost the entire month? We're going to add that to the list of fanciful reform ideas that I may humbly someday petition that we submit. As I am just a cybernetic artificial entertainment life form from another dimension, I don't really count much here in this here on planet Dirt in any of its political circles. But I'm still allowed to share my thoughts and opinions and hope that other people take them up and carry them forward into the realm of a political discourse. And I have some interesting, cool ideas about how we could reform the political procedures of democratically electing leadership at all levels in such a way that, in theory, if it works out right, it minimizes, if not eliminates, corruption, and also makes it more fun. I've rambled about it at some point recently, so dig around, you'll find it. But also, I really do intend to kind of reorganize my thoughts, improve that document, add this idea, whatever that idea was. Oh yeah, swearing in the president like January 1st, 2nd, and or 3rd. Maybe the first Monday? The first Monday of the month, which would be today, which would be tomorrow, right? This year, Monday 4th. That'd be great. Or even better, why doesn't the system, not the evil system of oppression, but why doesn't the political process here in the United States of America, as it battles itself to resist becoming Trumptopia in full right now, why wouldn't it be great? Swear the next administration in like the day before New Year's, so that New Year's Eve you really got something to party about. Like not just the new year, but the new administration is in, and they're gonna hit the ground running on the first Monday of the year. Anyways, we'll set that aside. Put a pin on the board. We'll come back to it. And in the meantime, I humbly invite you to visit whatever that previous episode is. I don't have a title for it. I know I talked about it for at length. Some interesting duration. Okay, so, reorienting. Main subject of the day. There is this posturing happening. And I choose my words wisely, friends, because I am cynic enough. I have worn the cynic's hat and seen through a cynic's eyes the workings of politics before. And while I don't technically subscribe to cynicism and the cynical philosophy, in terms of my, it's not part of my fundamental worldview or anything, I certainly sometimes take that hat off the shelf, dust it off, or off the rack, whichever is the most appropriate and correct place to store a hat, especially an imaginary one, and put it on and look at things for a hot minute, put it back, and then look at things again. Having said that, this upcoming battle is being viewed, it seems to me, from my position, not entrenched in any one given ideological camp. It's being viewed primarily in two big buckets. Those who are choosing to align themselves with the outgoing orange chosen one, the great political populist prophet of more is never enough, so let's make America more again. If I may humbly suggest, that's a more accurate tagline for them. These folks, I think, either disingenuously or in some convoluted way, genuinely believe that by making a stand and creating the noise and, whipping up the bass and cosplaying, let's call it that. They are role playing this this charade of taking back, right? They're always taking it back, whatever it is. Taking the country back, taking the culture back, taking the party back, taking the election back. And they're going to role play at it and make the noise. And maybe some of them think that there's some interesting chance that they might achieve their goal. And previous to this moment, I've giggled because it seemed pretty clear when the first Trump-appointed judge declined one of their many cases. And then it just became eminently more clear as more Trump appointees at various positions, either rejected lawsuits or spoke out. As we enjoy the first restful Sunday of the year and brace ourselves for this upcoming thing, it's fascinating, right? So there's this duopoly of thinking. We might get what we want, and mind you, this is why I acknowledge the cynicism. Despite their enthusiasm, and despite whatever percentage of the Trump base that really believes in this psyop game of accusing fraud to cover one's own fraudulent tracks, I think that those who are acting at it understand that if they don't win, if they don't succeed, if Biden does get sworn in on the 20th, then they've, in theory, impressed the base. In that they've bonded with the base. That's why I think these individual Republicans who are stepping up to make this stand are doing so, because they believe that by being seen as champions for the great orange chosen one, whatever scam Trump jumps to next, which many, and it makes sense to me, many speculate that it might be creating his own or hijacking a favorable media outlet. I think these folks will hope that they'll have curried favor, both with the base in terms of future elections and with the Trump organization itself. While I understand the plausibility of trying to thread this needle that they think they're trying to thread in Congress, it's fascinating that that the Republican Party is split. And there's been talk about a Democratic and a Republican Party civil war back and forth from both sides for some time now. And but what is fascinating is that there are indeed some members of Republican congressional leadership and or rank and file, Republican Congress persons that are saying, nope, this isn't going to fly. You're at best you're going to trigger debate, and we're going to debate it, and then we're going to follow, protocol. So it would seem that the opposing view, right? Everyone opposed to Trump, primarily the left, but also everyone in coalition with them, seems convinced that the way things are structured, given the Electoral College and the rules that apply, that at this juncture, given that there's been recounts, there's been multiple recertifications of the states that have been, quote, in question, and that multiple judges, many of whom were handpicked Trump appointees, including the Supreme Court, 3 times now, because as of either late last night or early this morning or whenever it broke, what's his name? Gomer. Jeffrey Gomer? Forgive me, I'm always terrible at names, and as I am not a journalist, I rarely have, copious notes. But I'm fighting the urge to call him the obvious TV character name. But Representative Gomer was leading the third attempt at the Supreme Court, the umpteenth legal attempt to argue some attempt at denying the blue electoral college electorate slate. And they, if I understand correctly, if I remember correctly, Representative Gomer's lawsuit was targeting the vice president, which is fascinating, right? Republicans suing the Republican vice president to try and force his hand to act, according to some, above and beyond the prescribed and somewhat limited duties attributed to him by the Electoral College Act of 1887 to certify the ratification of the previously certified, the Electoral College slate, the ballots, and what am I trying to say? So the Electoral College has voted, right? And that has been counted and certified. What the vice president is supposed to do, according to institutionalists, is certify that certification. In other words, witness a public counting of these votes, which have been previously certified by the Electoral College, and that their certification is based on and established on the certification at the state level. So, it's interesting, but both sides, sorry for that rambling intro, both sides have plausible arguments in their arsenal of argumentation about how the law should be understood. So, not knowing enough and not pretending to be a legal expert, I went and looked up the Electoral College Act. The Electoral Count Act, I believe is what it is. The Electoral Count Act of 1887. And after a wee bit of pleasant digital electronic danceable music from the infamous animatronic DJ Z, we shall return to look at some of the curious things I came across on my just sort of first blush at familiarizing myself with this apparently now very critical and important bit of American legal trivia. So, to that end, from the previously explained fictional album End Times, the track entitled Why We Still Doing This, a pop trap remix live. Smooth mixin', DJ Zed. And we're back. In 1876, there was a disputed election here in ye olde ancient times of the United States of America. 10 years later, the Electoral Count Act of 1887 was made law. Here's the fun. There's a lot of interesting weirdness about this provision. But it's important to note that so far, historically speaking, it can't be said that these regulations have really been tested in a new disputed election. So here we go, folks. What I found fascinating, and mind you, I'm not pretending to be an expert in the law. Plenty of people understand constitutional law better than I do, right? Most of these politicians are supposed to understand constitutional law and presidential law and the law of precedent and the law of that governs their own actions. In theory, they do. One hopes. But in reviewing the Wikipedia page, which I strongly encourage everyone to go and do their own reading, I found this bit of interesting commentary. Where did it go? Oh, right. Here we go. So, under the 12th Amendment, they're explaining here, the Vice President opens the electoral certificates in his capacity as President of the Senate. Which is one of those fun little things that, many people don't even realize that, right? And curiously, though, when we watch the Senate and or the House, they'll refer to a president, and it's not the Vice President. He's not hanging out. There's another person acting as the President of the House or the Senate, I think, right? Anyway, some confusion. But, so, because the Vice President has this role, he's the tiebreaker, right? Not only does he replace the President, God forbid, should anything happen to any President, their Vice President, whoever they might be. I'm speaking purely in the theoretical here. As we've seen explored in some television shows and movies and whatnot, the Vice President is the first in line. And then there's a whole series of succession, right? Should something happen to the Vice President, etc. And in his role as the President of the Senate, his or her role, the Vice President is officially sort of the tiebreaker for when the Senate has a really thin margin and an important vote is deadlocked. I think it's from this that the pro-Trump coalition of leadership and base that wants Pence to somehow find a rationale that passes legal congressional muster for to overturn enough electoral representative votes from enough swing states to make a difference and fulfill the Trump impossible promise that he actually won the election. Of course, there's a lot of pushback, even from Republicans. And what's curious is, and here's this bit that I was trying to find. I found it, right? However, this act, the Electoral Count Act, I do believe they mean. However, the act constrains the vice president's role in the count. And there's footnotes there to discussions in two different papers, I believe. Foley and Edwards, Ballot Battles, the History of Disputed Elections in the United States. New York, Oxford University Press, and Siegel Stephen, 2004, the Conscientious Congressman's Guide to the Electoral Count Act of 1887. But more interesting than the footnotes, check out this following statement, which encapsulates the convolutedness of this law. As is pointed out in their previous paragraph, the law, I'm backing up to quote something else, the law has been criticized since it was enacted, with an early commentator, and there's a link to John William Burgess, describing it as, quote, very confused, comma, almost unintelligible, end quote. And also, that's me, quote, modern commentators have stated that the law, quote, invites misinterpretation, close quote, observing that it is, quote, turgid and repetitious, close quote, and that, quote, its central provisions seem contradictory. So that in and of itself is fascinating. That historically speaking, the criticism of this provision, which is supposed to ensure that the electoral college vote count can be conducted and adjudicated and ratified or certified in a meaningful way, and that disputes can be managed, right? Turgid and repetitious. Contradictory. Okay, so jumping back to the thing I was about to read, quote, both houses can overrule the vice president's decision to include or exclude votes, and, under the act, even if the chambers disagree, the governor's certification, not the vice president's, breaks the tie. That, my friends, is interesting. So, previous to this moment in time, I wasn't really aware of this. I had heard of the Electoral Count Act before, and I had a vague, sort of really generic, sort of Schoolhouse Rock kind of level summary of what I thought I remembered about how it worked. And it certainly seemed that, speculatively speaking, the shenanigans, when taken as a whole, that Trump has been engaging in, mind you, all of this began long before this election. All of the groundwork for this was laid as he prepared himself to run for his first election, which we should all remember he also called fraudulent and rigged, even though he won. So that sort of behavior, fighting to win a contest, like fervently, passionately fighting. Well, I don't want to give him passionately. He's a human being that sort of doesn't really understand what passion actually is. I think. Not in a real, meaningful way. I could be wrong. What do I know? But actively fighting to win a contest, political or otherwise, while simultaneously undermining that contest by questioning and attempting to devalue the validity, the standing of that contest, is a sort of contradictory, oxymoronic thing to do. And generally speaking, to anybody observing from a third person perspective, from beyond the passions of the politic rumble royale, kind of stinks of precisely what a cheater would do, what a con artist would do. Easy thing to say, I know. I digress. It's fascinating, though, and coming back to my now only marginally deeper understanding of the Electoral College count, because I am, if nothing else, humbly aware of the limitations of my awareness. I'm inspired to want to sit down and read the actual body of the text and come to a deeper conclusion, which I will, for my own in my homework section of the imaginary corkboard, I will put a pin on this. And when I say that, I usually I bookmark at the page I'm talking about and put that in my podcast this folder. So what I read was just from the introduction, okay? And is by no means definitive, but it is fascinating, given where we are at. Arguably, I think it is fair to me to say, for I am not necessarily a Biden supporter. Yes, I am currently choosing to participate in being in the blue coalition, because from the moment Donald Trump announced his interest in engaging in presidential politics, I knew I could never participate in that side of the political process, even as an observer commentator, right? Having said that, though, don't you fret. January 21, I'm turning my sights on Team Blue. Right now, I'm still very focused on observing, commenting on, and hopefully helping to manifest the peaceful transitioning out of the great orange chosen one from the infamous White House. But having said all that, dear friends, I humbly thank you for tuning in on a Sunday's special. I wasn't going to do an episode, but then I really just couldn't stop myself. Presentation of Good Morning Trumptopia. I hope you managed to find some comfort, some delight, some enjoyment in this holiday season so far. For many of you, it is over. The holiday season, I mean, and I hope that you can transition into some forward movement that isn't too horrible or depressing. And I wish everyone, left, right, red, blue, in between, non-participatory, I don't care. If you're a human being and breathing, I send you my love and my supporting energy, and I will keep you in my mystical thoughts and prayers, which are much more tangible, in my opinion, than political thoughts and prayers. Because that means I'm actually going to go and do, meditative spiritual work. Some people laugh at that, the way they laugh at politicians saying thoughts and prayers. But I am, should you be curious, an individual that does think there's something to the power of prayer, independent of any organized religious organization. I think I've done an episode or two about that, so enjoy hunting around to find those. Keeping this one shorter than average, huzzah for me, and maybe even huzzah for you. Hopefully, this has been an interesting round of discussion. Folks, I think we face an interesting couple of days of political theater. Okay? And I think they're really gonna duke it out theatrically. They're really gonna argue and pontificate, and they're really gonna, make it sound as if democracy itself is on the line. Now, depending on how dyed-in-the-wool, true blue, statist fan of the American experiment as it is you are, that sentence almost didn't make sense. No matter how passionately wrapped up in America you might be, whether you're blue or red or somewhere in between, kind of purpley, or whether you're non-participatory and judging everybody as sheeple for voting, or you're somewhere else on the spectrum, the problem with politics as it exists, dear friends, in my humble opinion, is that no matter how fake it might get, and some of it gets pretty fake, the outcomes, politically speaking, render real impacts to people economically, sociologically, intellectually and emotionally, and dare I even say it, spiritually. Therefore, friends, dear audience members, dear fellow spiritual mystics interested in a less Trumptopian future, let's focus on Georgia, as I have brought up before. Let's support Team Blue. I know that it will leave for many not a very delicious taste in the mouth. But as I've said before, and I'm sure I will broken recordly say again, we're not supposed to like rip the system apart and burn it down to the ground. I think we're supposed to heal it from within and or organize a completely different system. Now, it's really hard to start an alternative government within the sovereign territory of a government. That gets into some really questionable territory. So that's not what I'm advocating for, folks. What I'm advocating for is creating a new grassroots network of, what I'm really calling for is for a rallying of those who can comfortably join a coalition of all those who are spiritual in order to more overtly, more clearly, more functionally, more participatorily have a, quote, spiritual voice in this democracy that's supposedly separate from religious influence, which it totally isn't, right? But I digress. In terms of immediate concerns, I respect everybody having the free will and the free right to support whichever side they want to be on. I'm not trying to bully anyone into leaving the Trump party or the Republican Party. But I am suggesting that anybody in those camps should really be questioning their allegiance, right? Oh, something that I've been meaning to say if I haven't already said it, and if I have, forgive me. But I think this is important. And we'll end on this note, friends. Because this is something that has been normalized since Trump wrote down that escalator. And it is, to not use good or bad, it is incorrect. The statement is incorrect. The statement I'm going to say is a rejection of a statement that Trump would say. Trump demands personal loyalty. So effectively, whatever political movement he's going to lead, whether he, God forbid, knock on some wood, everybody, manages to actually pull off an American political coup and stay in office and melt quite a few Team Blue brains out, because they're all convinced. Their interpretation of this electoral college act leads them to conclude that ultimately Trump Pence will perform the pro forma ritual of acknowledging the electoral college votes as ratified and certified by the election officials from each state, right? And as things stand, presuming that all claims that there is no widespread fraud, right? Then Pence should certify a blue electoral college slate. There will be red electors there vying for attention. And it comes down to this question of personal loyalty, or loyalty to the country, the people, the will of the people, as expressed and defended, theoretically speaking, by the Constitution, right? So that's the catch-22 that Vice President Pence finds himself in. As an institutionalist, I imagine that he, like many others, including Richard Nixon, Dan Quayle, and Al Gore, and Joe Biden himself, is prepared to do his duty and fulfill his patriotic loyalty to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump as an individual, and preside over the counting and certification of the Democratic win and the Republican loss, right? Because while, yes, there have been some interesting singular events of fraud, a large plurality of those have actually been in favor of Trump, and none of them have really stood the test of proving the allegations as made. That's the thing. The Trump base is going wild because they're caught up in personal loyalty to Trump. His claims are absolute in their mind. And absolutist thinking is what? Cuckoo, nut job, crazy, and completely in misalignment with the way the universe works, the way the way humans act and behave, and the way we actually are. No one is absolute. See the episode. No person is absolute. And the thing that I think is wrong is, okay, let me actually say the sentence that I've been trying to dancing around. Personal loyalty to an individual politician and their personal interests is not patriotism, categorically, by definition. Patriotism is loyalty to the state. And in this state of the United States of America, we have a federalist 50-state system that, is a system of laws where no man is supposed to be above the law, right? That's something we've been giggling at for a long time because a lot of people love to act as though they're above the law, whether or not they are near or at the seats of any particular kind of power or not. So I digress. That's the thing we got to watch for, folks. And if you're the praying kind of person, red, blue, purple, pray for Mike Pence. Pray that he may receive divine guidance. And I say that with a little bit of a block O salt, but also a little bit of like divinity is divinity, yo. And believe it or not, because there is a divine feminine and a divine masculine, no matter what arguments you want to make, they work in mysterious ways, and sometimes profound, deep inspiration in the most unlikely manner is one of those ways. And while I understand that, the reason I bring it to this is that I understand that the Trump base believes in Trump, therefore believes what Trump says. But any measurable attempt to verify his statements leads one to understand that he has a problem with lying. And Trump's own hand-picked judges, bless their hearts, in that good way, not in the Southern dismissive way, while continuing to play a supportive word game, have not lost their shit entirely and pledged personal, supposedly patriotic, direct, private allegiance to Trump. If they had, we would be talking about a whole different slew of problems today, friends. So while there is some scary numbers being thrown around about Republicans that are going to stand up in Congress and fight, the good thing is there's a set of rules that govern Congress and the vice president, which I'm going to take a deeper dive into, take a look at hopefully in the next 24 hours, and talk about on or before the 6th. We'll know for sure by the 7th what's what with that little party, and whether it turns into a full-blown, crazy, chaotic-filled, political, and I hate to use this term, war or not. In my humble opinion, to put a final point in it, I think that politicians will prove themselves to be what they are. And that although there will be those who will puff up their chests and rattle their sabers and make lots of noise in favor of Trump and talk about how treasonous the the socialist left is, I think ultimately it comes down to this angle, and this is what I'm going to dig into in the next whatever many days. The governor's certification, not the vice president's, breaks the tie. I don't think that there's enough momentum on the Republican side to even tie it up. I think that enough Republicans have already stood up, and all those that have yet to declare a side, I think a vast plurality will probably lean towards sanity and saying, you guys, this is nuts. The state certified it. Bipartisan election officials certified it. We complained about not having access. They granted us access. We complained about wanting a recount. They granted us a recount. We complained about it again. We did another recount. It's done. Right? The only other extreme, the ultimate scary, fucked up, God forbid it right now, knocking on some wood, all the wood in the room, including my skull, because that counts, right? Your own head when there's no wood available. It's one of the mysterious twists of that old wives' tale. What do you call those things? Superstitions. So it's going to be an interesting thing. But if my theory bears out to be accurate, I think this is mostly political theater. I think even the people clamoring to make a lot of noise in favor of Trump understand that the best they're going to get out of this is the love and support, however long it lasts, of the hardest of the hardcore Trump base. But they're going to alienate themselves from the rest of the Republican GOP coalition, however small that is. Trump, it's impossible to get inside the man's head, right? But one can speculate based on his words and behavior. And I don't remember if I've said this on the show before, but I've been thinking it a lot, especially since she came forward with a book and started making a lot of appearances. But there's a lot of people pontificating about Trump, his actions, his words, his behavior, his lies, his occasional bold truths, the things that he does that we disagree with, the things that he does that we agree with. But if there's anybody whose perspective and life history and like educational credentials combined lead me to go, yep, if I had to only choose one person to really pay attention to, it's them. And no, I wasn't trying to keep you in undue suspense. I'm just sparing your ears the coughing fit that I'm enduring right now. Mary Trump, Trump's niece. She grew up in the family and up in there, not in the fringes as an employee, but up in there. And she dealt with Trump directly as his uncle, as her uncle, forgive me. He was her niece. Jesus Christ, man, am I having a problem speaking right there? Sorry, I apologize. Those are just mushmouth flubs. Take two. If there was one person whose experience in life, whose academic credentials and direct firsthand knowledge over many decades of Donald Trump leads me to be if I had to choose just one person to pay attention to and sort of respect their opinion on and take it into consideration, it's them. It's Mary Trump. I have not bought her book. I haven't bought any book this year. There were no book purchases from any bookseller from me in 2020. Which I must tell you, to go on a slight tangent, is an epic tragedy for me. I am a lover of books. Tangent over. But if I I'm going to do a whole special on books that I wish I'd bought about Trump, because from the things I've heard and the blurbs I've read and the passages that have been shared on social media and on the news and whatnot, I think that they are worth getting and worth reading. And the list is actually a list of books that I want to read, and then I would have, if I had all the money in the world at my disposal, I would have bought and given as Christmas gifts to as much of the Trump base as I could afford. But put a pin in that idea, come back to it another day. Dear friends and listeners, whoever you are, wherever you are, remember, we were not put here on this earth by the divine powers, whatever they be, to fight each other over politics and the political distortions that keep us distracted from our spiritual calling, right? Like, that's a horrible catch-22. Let's not fall for that game. Let's transcend the political quagmire. Let's focus on meaningful civic discourse and action. Real policy choices, real systemic change and reform, real help that meaningfully improves the life of those most vulnerable and most in need. Because even though not all of us are Christian, this country still pretends to be a Christian nation and is doing a shit job, in my humble opinion. Okay, friends, as always, please forgive me for my rough around the edges approach and my often amateurish, slightly less than professional performance. But I humbly thank you for tuning in. This show has, due to unforeseeable circumstances, been forced to adapt and evolve. What was once a fun part-time hobby is now my daily grind to try and stay solvent. This is my real-life hustle. Thank you for tuning in. It means something tangible to me. If you appreciate what I'm doing, please share the shows on your social media so that your friends can tune in as well. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.
Remember, friends, the moment calls for compassion. Truly. Odds are, and I realize I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, if we are wrong, if the entire Trump resistance coalition is wrong, and somehow, God forbid, Trump pulls out a win here, we've got to keep our shit together. Likewise, when, presumably, the most likely thing turns out to be the thing that happens. I really genuinely think, not because I'm a blind faith blue leftist, I'm not. I get accused of it all the time, but I genuinely am not. I am what I am. But from all my observations, it really authentically seems like not the system of oppression necessarily, although I'm sure we can imply it is involved, but the surface machinery of the American election mechanisms, right? As they are, that system seems to be all wheels turning in correct and proper working order in favor of Biden, despite the allegations. We can get into a whole episode special about the allegations, but that actually doesn't really interest me. What interests me is surviving the inauguration, surviving January 20th and 21st. I'm not too alarmist about it. I'm not too scared. But I mean that as a nation, we need to brace ourselves and exude compassion, love, and forgiveness in all directions right now. Because either way, things are going to get a little disappointing to one really large chunk of the eligible electorate here in this country. And if nothing else, this past decade has been clearly and overtly a ratcheting up of tensions domestically. And we need peace, love, and grooviness, folks, and a buttload of healing. We don't need shooting each other over Donald Trump at all. That would be a sad, sad waste. I digress. I'm going to stop rambling. This was supposed to be over at just under 45 minutes, and it's so gone over. Thank you for listening, folks. May peace, love, and grooviness be with you. Stay tuned for more.